find comics that you enjoy and ones that you can tell are good. Like things that you can really sit down and study and, try making comics. It doesn't have to be long. In fact, I would encourage you to start small, and when you're getting underway with your big project, make 5 to 15 test pages. That sounds like a lot, but something that I've found with a bunch of my comics is that in the first 5 to 15 pages, if I just go straight in with the sort of, I guess I would say, final pages, the look changes so much in those first 5 to 15. And if you make 5 to 15 test pages, you're going to figure out what works, what doesn't, and you're going to be way less likely to try to redo the beginning, because doing those test pages, you'll have already tried it, and you'll see what worked.
Hello, my name is Annie, and you are listening to Worlds of Webcomics, a podcast in which I interview creative people who are creating comics for the internet, basically. Today's guest is another one that I discovered on, I believe, the Today's Hot series section of the front page of Webtoon, so another rising star. I think that she is really deserving the audience that is really growing now. She has a lot of different projects that she's created, so I think that she was able to provide a lot of unique insight in the interview. Even though she has multiple projects that she's working on, I think what you'll find amongst all of them, and I say this several times in the interview, is that they are just so wholesome. They just make you smile. They're very sweet. All the characters are very typically good-natured. It's all good fun, and I really think that you should check out all her different projects, which I'll have linked below. But I'll let her introduce herself, so let's go to the interview. So, for those who might not know, could you introduce yourself and your projects that you're known for?
Absolutely. Hello, I am Lissy Dixon. I'm mainly known for my comic LUNAR the Moon Rabbit, as well as my comic The Pumpkin Sells Real Estate, but I have about 6 comics that are currently running on Webtoons and Tapas, as well as a web novel and, just some YouTube videos and whatnot. So that's all the stuff I do.
Awesome. And if it's all right with you, I'd like to kind of stray from some of the questions I normally ask, just because your situation is pretty unique. I think it's really fascinating how you have so many projects going on. I think that's really cool that you can manage all that. So to start with that, could you kind of give us a brief rundown on each of those stories and I guess the pitch for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will start with LUNAR, since that's sort of the, I guess, biggest one right now that I'm mainly focusing on. And LUNAR is an all-ages webcomic about a magical space rabbit who finds herself on Earth and realizes, gosh, she really loves it here. And then The Pumpkin Sells Real Estate is exactly what you might expect from the title. It is about a metro pumpkin who sells real estate and gets himself some coffee sometimes. It's a nice slice of life sort of comic, and it is also all ages, which most of my comics are, but a couple of them, like Aces, do deal with some heavier tones, which Aces is sort of like I guess I would call it like a superhero romp. I don't know. It can be a little bit more intense at times, and it is planned to be my largest story thus far, and will probably run for quite a while. Then The Heyday Kids is a mini series that ties into Aces, and it's about sort of like a team of operatives who, they're not operatives. They think they are, and they're trying to be, but they're not so good at it. They were hired to be bodyguards for a interesting older man who just shows up out of the blue, and he's like, hey, I need you to be my bodyguards. And they're like, okay. So they're totally in over their heads. They don't know what they're doing, and everything just goes wrong. Which, it's also sort of a superhero story in an aspect, since it ties into Aces. And then I also have a sort of slice of life, I don't know what you would call it, sort of biographical, I don't know, just little mini comic that chronicles my different misadventures that I choose to do, and it is called Little Lady and the Misadventures, because of course. And then Wrong About the Stars is a cute cafe romance. Also, space, alien.
That's a really good pitch. And is that pretty much all of them, or?
That's all of the webcomics that are currently up, but I have plans for many more down the line.
I think that's so exciting because what I found, or what really blew my mind, is that when I went into each of those comics and kind of looked at the publishing dates, you seem like you're somehow doing all of this all at once. So, like, how are you managing that?
Right now, I'm mainly focusing on Lunar, but mainly the way that I was able to do all of them was it's sort of like I think someone who was on the podcast recently mentioned that it's sort of a way to help me focus and get more done because if I don't feel like working on one, I have so many others that I'll feel like working on something. And I've I've got this terrible little sort of nervous tick almost where I always have to be doing something with my hands. If I'm watching a movie, I can't just watch the movie. I need to be like sketching or something. And it's a way to actually help me focus and it helps me stay sane half the time and just that's my way of doing it is that I'm always working on something and somehow it turns into a cohesive comic along the way.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I'm one of those people who can't like sit still while I'm watching a movie. So that's me too.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit hard, but then at the same time, I feel like it's easier to absorb things because I don't know, it's just something about being able to move while listening and absorbing visuals. It just works better.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of opinions out there over like if people feel really strongly about if you should listen to podcasts or music or watch TV or movies while you're creating, or if some people are very big advocates for like just in silence, like just focus on that. Is there something that you find helps you kind of tune into what you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. Like, if I watch like a show that I've seen before and it's something that I don't have to be paying attention to like the story beats or anything like that, that sort of helps keep me on task. And then I have tons of different playlists that are sort of tailored for my individual products and projects and everything that I'm doing. So I'm able to turn on that playlist and it immediately gets me into this headspace of just that's the story. This song reminds me of, oh, that reminds me of this character or this part of the story or something. And it helps me keep on task just way better because I've got so many songs that just remind me of the stories.
Yeah, I do the same thing actually. I think it's nice to have like something that gets you in the mode and kind of inspires you. Like I'll find myself like imagining movie trailers of my stories set to those music, you know?
Same, same. And then it's the problem because it's like you almost get your heart set on that and you're like, if I ever get a movie adaptation of my project, I gotta have this song.
Yeah, right? It's like has a personal, like a sentimental value now too.
It does.
Well, okay. I kind of got ahead of myself. I'm excited about again, I just am very impressed with all the projects you have going on. But
Well, thank you so much.
yeah, just to backtrack a little bit, tell us a little bit of backstory on you and how you got into art in the first place.
All right. Well, I've been drawing, like all little kids do. I drew probably from the time I was like 3 or 4 all the way until I was like 9 or 10. But when I was around 10 years old, I started realizing, hey, I didn't realize, but art is an actual job. People get paid to make things. And one of my favorite cartoons growing up was X-Men Evolution. And this is the silliest thing. I didn't know that the X-Men were from comic books or anything. I just thought that was them. That was the only thing they were ever from. But then I started, like, when I would go to the bookstore and stuff, I would see these comics that had these characters on them, and I'm like, wait, what is that? And my dad was like, a comic book? And I was like, wow, that's cool. I know those characters. And then I got into the show Winx Club, and I figured out that it had comics as well. And I was like, ooh, I want to read those. And I read them, and I was like, I like to draw. I wrote stories a lot whenever I was, doing projects in school and stuff, I can make a comic book that'll put together all of the things that I love to do. And so I gave it a few tries, but they weren't great. But as I kept studying other comics and like I found these Dick Tracy comic books from like the 90s that my oldest brother had, and I fell in love with the medium. And as I started making my own comics, I started reading and enjoying more and more. And then eventually I found Webtoon and I was like, dude, I have so many ideas for stories. I can put these up on here and I can just release all of these ideas I've had for so many years now. And it was a pretty big deal at the time because it, everything fell into place and it took years to do it, but it finally did.
Yeah, oh, those are all such good sources of inspiration as well, too. So that's fun. That's a good way to fall in love with comics.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm still madly in love with all of these concepts and stories that I read as a kid because it's like, that's my roots. That's what really gave me wings to start making this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So I know you said like Webtoon was a big deal for you. Why webcomics as opposed to a traditional comic like you were reading as a kid?
Oh man, I've always had this terrible habit of making all of my comics tie into each other in some subtle way. And as I started learning more about actually publishing them, I wanted to do traditional publishing and stuff like that, but then I realized copyright. And if all of my properties are tied into each other, I can't go selling copyright to one series here at this company and then selling copyright somewhere else or whatever, or publishing it through that company. I would need to have a way to actually publish it all myself so that I could maintain creative control and continue putting in those little cameos and Easter eggs and tie ins that I love so much. So, Webtoon is a wonderful way to get an audience who will actually, read the stories and support them without having to commit to giving away copyright or any sort of ownership and just giving you so much freedom to do whatever you want. And I still am planning on having print copies, but it's great because Webtoon gives me a way to share my stories without waiting until I can afford a print run or something like that.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good answer. I feel like considering practical things like copyright as well as creative freedom is important to consider together.
Yeah, and also it's just I've always been someone that it's like I love being able to support people monetarily, but I've never held like a regular job, like a fast food gig or an office job or anything like that. And I very rarely can actually afford to support the creators that I love. So I never want someone to feel like, oh, I would love to read her stuff, but I can't afford to buy the book. So it's nice because I can have like a Patreon where I put the stuff up for payment, like early or something, but then no one ever has to feel left out because I can post it somewhere like Webtoon and Tapas for free. And if you wait a little bit, you can read anything that I make. And that just, there are also ways to make money through there. So even if someone's reading it for free, I'm able to still get some support and also support my community.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your insight on platforms like Patreon. And I believe you've mentioned in your artist comments that you have qualified for their Webtoons ad program as well. Is that right?
Yes, I guess it was a few months ago now. I managed to it was thanks to actually getting promoted on one of the I think it was in the staff pick section of Webtoons on the front page. And I suddenly got a huge influx of readers and I was totally overwhelmed and I managed to qualify for the ad program and get accepted to it. And granted, I haven't kept up the same numbers that you sort of need to get into the program, but once you're in, they're not really going to kick you out unless you're doing really bad or you suddenly start like putting up stuff that they're like, whoa, whoa, that's not allowed on our platform. But it's wonderful because I'm able to make a little bit of money here and there, but it's still it's a bit difficult because they actually do publish their payment records every month for I believe anyone who has webtoons can see who got paid what every month. And I'm not quite making what I need, like view wise, I'm not quite making what I need for a monthly payout, but any amount of money helps in this business. And it's most of my income actually comes from Patreon, but it's really nice to have a mix of both.
Definitely. I think artists nowadays are kind of in a position where it's wise to have those multiple streams of revenue.
Oh, absolutely.
Are you in a position where you're able to do art full time?
Yes, I'm not quite able to afford an apartment or anything, but my parents have been very gracious and they're like, until you're able to bring in the income you need, we'll let you stay here. And I'm like, you guys are the greatest, you know? Because it gives me the time to sit and actually work on my things and continue doing things like commissions or local art shows, which that's been a big source of revenue for me also, is like street fairs and things where I'll get a booth or something. But it's art is indeed my main source of revenue and basically all I do.
Well, congrats. That's really exciting to be able to have that. And I think that's a good tip as well to not underestimate your local scene. Kind of check out your own immediate art community and see what they have available for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I also encourage, like, I live in a really small town, so there's not really any conventions or anything that are within like an hour or two of me. But, if you're starting out, really look hard at things like conventions and local fairs and craft fairs especially. You would be surprised. A lot of people locally are really happy to see a budding artist or even someone who's pretty accomplished. It gets them sort of like a sense of town pride or something like that and be like, hey, this person is taking their time to table here and look at all the stuff they made. And you can get a really big boost for things like webtoons also from local events, which I noticed that recently. I had an art show back in March, I think, right before like the states closed and stuff, and I actually got a pretty big boost on like my Instagram and whatnot from local people, and it's like, hey, I know you, I recognize your face, and they're now like a recurring supporter of mine at this point.
Oh, that's so cool. I think that's a great way to give back to your community as well and to know that it's had like an actual impact in your following too.
Yeah, definitely. So don't underestimate the local people because that's the thing is you can have all the subscribers in the world offline, but if something happens and you can't get back online, having any sort of community locally is great.
Definitely. What do you feel has been the most helpful in gaining commission work?
That is just, man, I didn't even realize it whenever I was first getting into it, but putting out stuff on Instagram was actually my main source of commissions. And doing a really wide variety of stuff has gotten me the most commissions. But also, I've noticed that my friends seem to be the people who commission me the most. And like the more people you know, the more likely someone is going to go, "Oh, hey, I know this person. They can draw this for me and I trust them." So, you don't even necessarily need to know the person personally, but like interacting with your community on Webtoons or Instagram or anything, that's a really good way to get commissions in the future because you sort of build like a trust and a mutual comfort level with the people around you.
Definitely. I mean, I think that goes back to making connections at like a local art event as well. The fact that these people want to follow you because they met you in person. It's uh, that familiar quality, and being able to interact with people is important. I think both, just on a not on like a human level, but
Yeah,
also uh, don't be afraid to kind of network and make those connections too.
yeah, and don't be afraid of traveling for events or anything like that. I am hoping at some point to be able to travel and do some conventions out of state and sort of start gaining sort of a community outside of my local zone. So don't be afraid if you can. Look into going other places too and spreading your reach.
Yeah, I would be really excited to do that as well. Hopefully, all this COVID stuff is doesn't last too much longer and we can all connect in person again.
Oh, hopefully, I miss it.
Yeah, right. Going back to webcomics specifically, it sounds like you have comics on not only Webtoon, but Tapas as well, which is another popular platform. Um,
Yes.
Comparing the two, uh, do you have a preference or do you feel like each of them has their own pros and cons?
I definitely see pros and cons with each. Webtoon has what feels like a more active community, but that also is just partially due to the fact that they're on top of the marketing game and you see stuff about Webtoon everywhere these days, like social media advertisements. I've actually gotten ads in physical comics before for Webtoon, so I'm like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. But they have really good activity, but because of how many people are on there, it's a lot harder to sort of get into like the ad programs and stuff. Whereas Tapaz, they still have a lot of users, but they have sort of like a less, I would almost say, rabid community because they're everyone there seems a lot more chill and they don't interact as much, but you can tell they're reading because they may not be commenting and liking every episode, but they're still viewing it and they're still subscribed. But that makes the threshold to get into like the ad programs and things like that way lower. So it's easier to get sort of a foot in the door there, but it's a lot harder to keep that foot inching in the threshold almost, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed too that you had this clever thing at the end of each of the LUNAR episodes where you would do like a fun fact, or I should say, a bun fact about
Yeah.
about bunnies, or you would draw like or include a picture of your own pet rabbit. Do you think that Webtoon kind of facilitates that interactiveness a little bit more as
Oh,
well?
definitely. Because I will say I've been posting pretty much the exact same thing on both Tapaz and Webtoons for months now. I just upload the exact same images to both, and I have gotten no big reactions from any of the bun photos on Tapaz or anything. I've gotten a couple comments where it's like, "Wow, it's a rabbit." I'm like, "Yeah," but on Webtoons, it's like everyone immediately panics. So like, stop, stop! There's a rabbit. There is a photo of a rabbit here. We need to look at this. And this just it feels like it makes people more excited because it's like I'm showing them my pet, and that feels very personal almost. And Webtoons really lends itself to a personal touch.
Definitely. I think that knowing those differences is really helpful, especially for someone who might listen and isn't really sure where to launch their own webcomic. So thank you for sharing that
Yeah,
insight.
and I would definitely encourage, at least at the start, sort of trying both and seeing which you prefer because I like the sort of backdoor uploading side for Tapaz a little bit better, but Webtoons just has a lot of pros as well. So it's nice to try both and see what works best for you personally.
Right. I remember back in the day before like things were a little bit more user friendly and specific to webcomics, we had like Smack Jeeves and Drunk Duck. I don't know if you were around when all that was going on, but
I
uh,
wasn't.
you weren't. Oh, okay. I was gonna ask: was Webtoon like the first place that you posted web comics?
It wasn't. I actually have my own website, but unfortunately, Weebly, the spot that I used to upload my stuff on my own website for a long time, I overwhelmed it because I have so many comics, and Weebly is not made the same way as something like an old fashioned WordPress blog would be, or something like that. And it does not handle the sort of like click through full page layouts super well. And that's sort of one thing that like I tried making my own website for the stuff for a long time, but you don't get very organic growth or discoverability with an independent website just for your stuff. But what I found is posting stuff on Webtoons sort of made people go back to my other site, but most people just stuck with Webtoons. And I found myself, if I found a comic that was available on its own website and also Webtoons, I would usually go to Webtoons because it's way more like hands on, easy to do just with like a phone or something like that.
Right. And Speaking of which, I know you kind of alluded to hoping to eventually go to print. Could you take us through your process and whether you format specifically for vertical scrolling or not?
Oh yeah, I most of my comics I started them with the full intent of, going to print at some point. So I usually try to start with like a full classic, I guess you'd say just page with the
Mm-hmm.
panels laid out like they're going to be whenever they're printed. I've tried it both ways, and I tried formatting a scrolling comic to the page format, and it didn't work great. It also didn't help that I didn't save the images in good resolution. I just saved them in
Mm.
the scrolling resolution, and wouldn't you know it, whenever you go to print, that's kind of small. So I've found that I'm able to be a lot more creative with my page layouts almost when I keep in mind that I'm going to be formatting for webtoons. So I try to mainly make it the page format, but then also keep in mind, hey, whenever I go to format this, how am I actually going to make this work? And it's actually saved me a few times, like in the most recent installment of Lunar. The sort of like little flashback pages with the like no black borders. It was just sort of like a dry brush white stroke around the outside. Those I
Mm.
very nearly did a different way, and I would not have been able to make it work for scrolling format. So it actually worked better the way I wound up doing it because I remembered, oh hey, whenever I convert this, how is that going to work?
Right. It's good to keep both of those in mind. And it's nice, I think, to know that some things it's kind of exciting when things work in a certain format as well, the
Oh
best.
yeah. It's very satisfying also to look at it and think, hey, I feel like it works in both formats, but if someone reads it in, say, the page format first and then they go to read it in the scrolling format, you can get something different out of both of those. And yet it's the same story and the exact same art and pages and everything.
That's true, yeah. And kind of incentivizes things like Patreon, I'd imagine, as well.
Oh, yeah. I think so, at least.
Yeah. As far as going from writing to posting, do you have a favorite stage of the process?
I think one of my favorite stages has been just like whenever I'm actually sitting down and I've kind of figured out the panel orientation, and then I get to actually start doing like the sketching, doing like rough, really toothy sketches and everything like that. I just love the organic feel of all of it and how I'm able to just sort of like check out of everything and just throw myself completely into the sketching. And that actually, a couple of my comics have really sketchy line art because I feel like since that's one of my favorite parts of the process, I put so much energy into it that whenever I go to do refined line art, sometimes I lose that energy. So I've just embraced having sketches as the final line art for a few of them because I love it so much.
Oh yeah, I think I mean I relate to that. I think a lot of people can as well, where it's almost like sometimes the cookie dough tastes better than the cookies, if you know what I
Oh,
mean.
oh, definitely, definitely.
Yeah. And speaking of the beginning of the process, your ideas are so unique and cute and wholesome. I just
Oh,
love I just love them so much. I know that you kind of address this in like a Q&A episode, but how do you come up with your ideas, and can you let us know a little bit about how you write, whether that is a loose outline or a detailed script or something in between?
oh yeah, definitely. So a lot of my stories come from things either it's like a mental image I get whenever I'm listening to a song or something, or like for things such as Lunar, that actually came from I was sort of like feverish and sick, and I was totally out of my head, and I was like, "Hey, space rabbit! I love space rabbits!" And I ran with the idea. And if I had been, healthy and not feverish and sick, I probably wouldn't have followed through with the idea because it's just kind of I wouldn't say necessarily a weird concept, but it's not something conventional in a weird way. It feels conventional in practice to me at least, but that's one thing that, like, whenever I'm really tired or maybe I had a dream or something, those tend to be my best ideas. Are the things that it's like I didn't really feel like I had much of a hand in coming up with them, but then it's kind of like someone giving you a big chunk of clay. You didn't get the clay, but someone gives it to you and you're able to start molding it and fine tuning and smoothing it out. Except at the same time, it was my brain that gave me the idea. I was just asleep or something.
I love that. That's a really beautiful metaphor. And as far as like, do you write dialogue as you're drawing? Is it more like storyboarding for you? Or how does that work?
I usually write sort of like a loose outline is what I tend to call them as opposed to a script. And I throw in, vaguely, like, for example, this is where they are. Maybe they do this with their hands. Maybe they make this face. And then I put in a kind of solidified idea of what the dialogue is going to be. And I do actually, whenever I'm doing the final lettering and stuff, I throw in the exact phrasing and sort of verbiage that I put in the outline, but then I refine it a lot. And once I actually see it on the page in the context of the art, that helps me refine the dialogue a bit. So that's sort of a nice thing of doing everything yourself, is that you can sort of ping pong around in the process, and it's like, oh, I wrote out the whole thing, but it's really loose. But since I'm the one doing it, whenever I do the sketching, if a part's not working, I can just sort of like tear it out and move forward and rearrange.
Right, that makes sense. And this might be totally coincidental, but I noticed that after reading your comic and looking up some stuff that the idea of a moon rabbit is like actually like a Chinese folk tale. Is that just a coincidence, or was
That
that
was
inspiration at all?
that was completely a coincidence, and someone commented on the comic. I guess that was like 2 or 3 months ago, and they said, "Wow, I love that you were inspired by Asian folklore for the moon rabbits." And I'm like, "The what?" So I went and I looked it up, and I figured out a bunch of different cultures have stories and myths and legends about rabbits from the moon, and quite a few of them are blue rabbits. And I'm like, oh, wow, would you look at that?
That is so funny. Your brain was inspired in some mythical way, I guess.
It is, but it's kind of neat because it shows you that multiple people can have the similar or same ideas and do them in really different ways.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think it's all in execution for sure.
Yep. And I had no idea that those other stories existed, so hey.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that they existed until after reading your comic either. So I was like, oh, I wonder if that's related. So anyway, um, and then after hearing a little bit about your writing process, do you have any main sources of inspiration for your art style?
Let's see, I have a lot. I have some friends who also make comics, and they're huge inspirations to me. And I also like the things that I mentioned at the beginning, things like X-Men Evolution, and just like the character designer Stephen Gordon. His art in general is a really big inspiration. Um, Things like Stephen McCraney's Space Boy, Kazuki Buishi's Amulet, Jason Brubaker's like both Sithra and Remind, those are big
Mm.
inspirations to me. So I have a lot of things that I draw inspiration from, and individually they don't always seem cohesive into what I draw from them, but it's lots of different sources and they all come together somehow into something.
Yeah, I think that's how style happens a lot. It's sort of like picking and choosing what you like and then bringing yourself into it as well.
Oh, absolutely.
When it comes to the fact that a lot of your or I guess all of your comics are all ages, and like I said, there is that kind of just really sweet and sincere wholesome quality to the storytelling, and I don't know if that's intentional or not, but do you have an intention when you're telling a story? Is there usually a message you're trying to get across or something that you're trying to convey?
I usually try to give a reader like a sense of hope or something that they can walk away with. I usually try to give them, like, maybe the story is not always super happy. Like, for example, Aces. That one's kind of a bummer, especially at the beginning. But in the end, it's like there's still something that the characters are working towards. And I just want to show that, maybe things aren't great, maybe things go wrong, but I want someone to be able to walk away from the comic, and even if they don't necessarily realize why, maybe they'll be smiling, or maybe they'll feel a little bit lighter than they did when they started reading. And I just want to always give someone something that they can walk away with, not always in a like an overt kind of like, what did we learn today, kids? Sort of message, but something that they can walk away with and hold on to and maybe think, hey, today's looking up.
Definitely. I love that. Even just hearing you say that made me smile. So
Well, I'm
there you go.
glad.
Um, and I noticed too, like when I was catching up on Lunar, that I was sad because I ran out of episodes before I realized it was over. Um, you are actually close to being done with the story. So you've kind of known where this is going the whole time. Is that right?
Yes, I try to start most of my projects with like a clear end goal or at least a decent bullet point list of where all we're going to stop along the way. And Lunar is actually, it surprised me because it was never meant to be like a big story or anything like that, but it feels so much longer than it is, sort of because of the way Webtoons is. Because
Mm.
the finished comic, at least how it's shaping up, I sort of have a few pages to nitpick and add some things to, but it's going to be a little under 100 pages long in the final format. And so, yeah, I've had a pretty clear idea of where it's going all along, and we're getting close. There's just a couple chapters left.
Well, that's exciting. Are you hoping to do like a Indiegogo or Kickstarter when it's done?
I'm thinking about it, but I'll be honest, the idea of fulfillment for those kind of things kind of scares me. And I guess it's also like a degree of, what if I put it out there and I get nowhere near the support I would need to actually follow through with it and print the books and everything. And that's sort of on me. It's like, if it doesn't work out, that's fine. You can always pick up and do a different solution or something like that. But I get nervous about that kind of stuff. So I don't actually know how I'm going to go about it, but I have also looked into the company that I would like to print through. They have a few options for fulfillment and whatnot. So I very well might try to do like a crowdfunding campaign or something.
Yeah, I think all of those concerns are definitely valid. I know that when and if you decide to put it into print, that it's nice that people will be excited about it for sure.
Yeah, it's really exciting to me to actually have so many people enjoying my stories because, like, a year ago, I hardly had any audience, honestly, and it wasn't overnight or anything, but it feels like there was just suddenly so many people there who are like, I can't wait for more, and it's like, wow, people are excited for this story. This is amazing.
Oh, for sure. And that kind of perfectly leads me into my next question, which would be we know, of course, that you got a very well deserved feature on the Webtoon front page. But do you have any other tips for growing an audience?
I would say making good stuff. Like, it's a great idea to just, put your stuff out there and actually upload your things. And it's perfectly fine to put your things up with the hope that maybe it'll get some traction. But at the same time, you need to just buckle down and just focus on, above all, making sure that you're putting out a good product. It's like, can you look at this objectively and say, hey, this art is pretty decent? Or maybe if you're not a super gifted artist, does the story sort of have like a bit of substance to it? Are you making something that's good? Because that's what's ultimately going to make people hook into your story and hold on to it. And that's just, that's one of the main things is making good stuff and then trying to be decently well rounded and putting in the time to actually make the thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that's, I mean, it's simple but so true. Just do it and make it good.
Yeah, and consistency is also important because that's something I learned recently. It's like, oh, maybe my audience would have grown a little bit more organically if I was a bit more consistent, but I
Mm.
was jumping around on projects because, sometimes I would be having kind of an off day and I wouldn't feel like working on the main one that I was focusing on at the time. So I wasn't super consistent with all of them, but they were still all getting uploaded. But having like a consistent look and upload schedule, that will also help a lot because people know when to tune back in.
Definitely. And I think, kind of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, too, I think what is exciting and inspiring about your story and perspective is that you are a really good example of someone who is able to do the whole working on multiple projects, but also still getting them done, like the fact that Lunar is almost over. So, kudos. That's awesome.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited about it because I started that story back in, I think it was like the June, July of 2018. And here we are, June, July of 2020, and it's almost done. It's taken me 2 years, but it's almost done. And that sort of reinvigorates me to keep moving forward and finishing other projects because that's something that I found. It's like the more you finish of anything, it feels like the more you're able to finish. Like you're able to give yourself permission to push forward almost.
Definitely. It's like working a muscle. It's like you're developing an endurance or a resiliency for that work ethic.
Definitely.
And again, speaking of which, do you have any specific time management tips?
Unfortunately, my schedule is all over the place. So I would encourage someone, if you're able to, get a consistent schedule. It's like if you're working a day job or you have decently consistent work hours or something, and comics are like off to the side or whatever you're doing is off to the side. Um, I think it's just important to try to have consistency and schedule out some time to work on your thing. Maybe just like 1 hour a day, but fit it in. Just like sit down, look at your schedule, and think, where can I fit this in? Like for me, I tend to get a lot of my work done sort of like later in the week. So I try to organize my whole week around that is the time that I can sit down and get the most done at once. Because like lately we've been only doing like one grocery trip every week or two, and we tend to do that
Mm.
earlier in the week. And I know to expect that, so I'm able to say, okay, maybe I won't do all of my work around this time. I'll do it later in the week. So, that. And then also, forcing yourself to do stuff is a necessary evil, sort
Mm.
of the comic industry. You're not always going to feel like working on something. Like, if you're formatting an episode, you're not always going to feel like formatting that episode. Sometimes you're going to be like, well, I just want to keep drawing it, but maybe you have a deadline. Sitting down and getting the discipline to follow through with things like that, that's a very important thing to learn for time management because the better you are at finishing and like following through with things you don't feel like doing, the better you tend to be. And also, look at your schedule. Are you just sitting watching Netflix or Disney or something like that when you should be working? Let's be honest, we all do it.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think there's kind of this myth of the artist and the muse, and a lot of times it's work. You got to make yourself do it.
It definitely is. And, if you're passionate about what you're doing, you're going to find a way to make it work. And that's sort of an interesting thing that I realized is like, there's a lot of people who say, I want to do it. And it's like, okay, are you passionate about it? And they'll say, yeah. And it's like, all right then, ready, set, go. If you're passionate, you can find a way to make it work. It's not always going to happen as fast as you want or necessarily as efficiently as you would hope, but you can find a way to make it work.
Definitely, I totally agree. And then with that, in trying to maintain a work life balance, we talked kind of about the antsiness of trying to just sit and watch a movie or something. But is there anything that you do to ensure like self-care for yourself?
Oh yeah, my family lives sort of like outside of town and we have like woods around us and stuff, so I try to make sure to go on a lot of walks, like just set down all the screens and everything and just have a few moments where I'm not working and, go for a brisk walk. I'm a bit of an overworker, so balance isn't necessarily my forte always, but I like to also sit and read sometimes. Like, sometimes it's just random blog articles, it's things like that. But then I have some kind of high maintenance pets, and that's a weird way that I take care of myself because it sort of like replenishes my stamina to help my poor little diabetic cat in the morning and sit down with him, and it also it gives me a sense of consistency is I know every morning and every evening at the same time I go outside and I sit with my cat and I give him his insulin dose and I can just sit there petting this really happy little cat. And that's one thing that it's like knowing that I have that structure in my day, that helps me sort of compose myself. And then I know that I can, around that time, I can grab a snack, I can go get a shower. But having little sort of respites throughout the day where you can just sit and catch a breath, that is really what I feed off of. Because pretty much 24/7 working is how I tend to find myself veering. But just grabbing those quiet moments and sitting down with a fat cat, that's what really helps me.
I love that. Yeah, I think sometimes we take care of ourselves by taking care of others. I think that's why there's kind of a millennial stereotype about plants, and you know,
Oh,
I think
definitely.
we enjoy that little that those moments of just taking care of something else. And it's a good relaxation for us too.
Oh, definitely. And, I don't have a lot of local friends. A lot of people have been moving lately. So that's one thing that kind of helps with, maintaining a work balance because it's like, oh, I don't have any friends who can go out for lunch or anything. So, and whenever things open back up, I'm sure there will be lots of people who they're like, hey, I'm in town. Would you like to go grab lunch or something? And like church will be open again, which is something that always gives me a moment where it's like, you can't be working during this. So it's a nice thing to go do in a way.
Definitely having something where the goal of the activity is to center yourself and kind of be still and calm is good.
Absolutely.
I guess just to wrap up, this has been such a great conversation so far. So thank you for all your thoughts. What advice would you have for any aspiring comic book artists?
I would say, find comics that you enjoy and ones that you can tell are good. Like things that you can really sit down and study and, try making comics. It doesn't have to be long. In fact, I would encourage you to start small. Like maybe you write a story and it's just like a silly little thing about like something that happened to you that day, kind of like Little Lady and the Misadventures is for me. You just pick a random thing that happened that's kind of amusing and you make a 1 or 2 page long comic about that, and that gives you something that you finished and you can learn a lot through that. And then as you start making a longer project, I would definitely encourage, continue studying other people's comics that are, really beautifully made or just something that inspires you. And when you're getting underway with your big project, make 5 to 15 test pages. That sounds like a lot, but something that I have found with a bunch of my comics is that in the first 5 to 15 pages, if I just go straight in with the sort of, I guess I would say, final pages, um, the look changes so much in those first like 5 to 15. And if you make 5 to 15 test pages, you're going to figure out what works, what doesn't, and you're going to be way less likely to try to redo the beginning because doing those test pages, you'll have already tried it and you'll see what worked. And that's going to save you a bunch of headaches later because consistency will just come naturally after doing a handful of pages.
So true. Yeah, I would advise the same. I've definitely been one of those people who had to redo pages, so don't be like me.
Yeah, it's a headache. So save yourself the headache and just try a few things before you commit.
Definitely. And what would be the best place for us to find all your social media and all your projects?
Well, let's see. I post a lot about them on my Instagram, which is at Lissy Dixon Art. And I also post a little bit about them on YouTube. I'm pretty much Lissy Dixon Art everywhere. And if you search on Webtoons or Tapas, you should be able to find me at Godsent Comics.
Excellent. And I didn't ask it before, but as someone who is also trying to do the whole YouTube thing, what are you trying to accomplish with your channel?
I'm trying to do things that will sort of give an insight to my creative process. And then I also like to share like animation and speed paints and whatnot. And I'm hoping at some point to have like trailers and things like that for my different projects.
Oh, very cool. So hopefully we can see some of those songs that you were thinking about earlier kind of incorporated.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I have some pretty neat ideas. Like once I wrap up LUNAR and some other projects, I have some pretty intense stuff that I'm hoping to make for my YouTube channel that it's going to take a lot of work, which is why I'm waiting until LUNAR is done. But I'm going to try to release that all on my YouTube channel.
Ooh, exciting. Well, I will have all of that linked in the description. And again, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for all of your really valuable insight.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute honor to be on here.
Thank you once again to Lissy for joining me for the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to her. Very sweet, fun person. Check out all her projects, her socials, her YouTube in the description below. Something that you guys mentioned to me is that it's a podcast and I don't actually say the name of my comic, even though I do have it in the end card here. So if you'd like to check out my comic, it is called Soul Match. So there you go. Thank you for pointing that out to me. Soul Match on Webtoon. And my other social medias, same name, Couch Potato Artists, are in the description below. And I know I've been saying it at the end here a lot, but I just really love seeing y'all's feedback. A lot of you guys are saying things like that this is inspiring to listen to because you're creating your own webcomics soon, and that just brings me so much joy. And some of you I've responded and said like, hey, tell me your webcomic name or let me know when it launches. And from the bottom of my heart, I hope you know that I am being genuine and sincere in that. Please tell me if you are a creator and you're creating something and you're enjoying this podcast, let's connect. I want to read your stuff. I think we should all support each other. So please do that. And I hope that I can provide more fun interviews for you, and I will see you here next Monday.